Well, last week, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu unveiled an economic stabilization plan worth 2 trillion naira. The initiative is part of his administration's efforts to revive the nation's economy over the next 6 months. This announcement was made during the inauguration of the Presidential Economic Coordination Council. The Presidential Economic Coordination Council is made up of the President's Economic Management Team, the legislature, the sub-nationals represented by the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, and, of course, the elite of the private sector. 13 key members of the organized private sector joining for a period not exceeding 1 year, subject to the President's directive, include Aliko Dangote, Tony Elumelu, Abdul Samad Rabiu, Amina Meina, Shegun Ajayi Kadiri, Funke Okpeke, and Dr. Doyin Salami, amongst others. What are the specific roles of members of the private sector, and how can they help play to help Mr. President achieve his dreams? Is this the way to go in revamping the economy? What are the underlying critical issues that can make the task of the private sector difficult to achieve? Well, I have Associate Professor of Law, Dr. Sam Amadi, is here to look at these issues. Very warm welcome to Newsnight. Several questions there begging for answers. 2 trillion. Quite humongous to reflate the economy. How achievable would this be?
Well, I think first, the economy is reflating, and the president, this is part of the several what I call industrial policy. Again, I have argued that the state has a role to play. And usually, depending on how you define industrial policy, every policy that is targeted at helping the economy, whether not just industries but also service sector, is now generally considered as industrial policy. And again, the IMF, everybody, initially we talked down on industrial policy, states should not interfere in the market, but now everybody accepts that we need to smart industrial policy. But the key point here is the structure of the coordinating council. I think I'm not a fan of this big so-called coordinating council. The idea is very simple. The president is chief executive of the entity called Nigeria. He has responsibility over the economy. And he should have a small team always of persons whose economics, because there are different kinds of economics, whose economics the president likes or think allied to his vision. So the president is the one who envisions where we're going. But he's not the expert, or may not be the expert. So he has to have, in the US, you have the Council of Economic Advisors, which is just 3 people, 3 economists, 1 chairman, who is confirmed, appointed and confirmed by Senate. The 2 other economists. They sit in India. You have the Economic Advisor Council. Also about 3 members, 1 chairman, 2 other members, and 4 to 5 part-time. This idea, this is not the first time. We saw it under Jonathan, under Buhari. This idea of amalgamating all business leaders into a so-called Economic Advisory Council doesn't make sense, and I tell you why. What it should make sense is that the economic managers, who should be the president and his advisors, who you choose very carefully, should periodically have engagement with the private sector. The private sector is not the manager of the economy. Your job as a policy person is to tease out what they think about policy. Let's say, for example, the president is thinking around maybe some industrial policies that may have impact in terms of how the businesses grow. It makes sense to send out proposal to the business council. You have NSG, you have NSG, you have different chamber of commerces and all that. You
have the IOD there.
You have IOD, you have even the entrepreneurs, the man, everybody. Send out policy suggestions and you harvest it, and then you sit back. First, this is incoherent. Left, center, right wingers, private sector, governors, who are 13 governors who are chief executives of some nation, who are actually, even if it's Soludo, who is a professor of economics, they are 24 hours saddled with managing their own sub-nationality. They are no longer there to advise the president. So I think first that you're going to have a problem of this shows some sense of lack of direction. See, by the time you're going to be a president, you already have broad ideas about how to run the economy. You already tag the guys who will help you deliver. You know, maybe look at professors of economics, their idea, what they've written. So you say, okay, this is my guy for the economy. This is the guy who's the Minister of Finance. By the way, the Minister of Finance, the economic advisor, the other key economic agencies, their heads ought to be the policymakers of government. So when I see these Dangote, Lumelo, I mean, look, these guys are successful entrepreneurs. That's not economy. The economy and the policy that supports the economy is not entrepreneurship in the private sector. It does two different things. These guys are looking at their bottom line. You need to envision an economic agenda. You need to think around how the economy of the globe is moving and what Nigeria needs to pitch in. Now, some of the economic ideas that will drive Nigeria's development are not going to work maximally for the private sector. You see, there's a conflict of interest. And that's why we talk about state effectiveness. I'll talk about state autonomy. The state should retrieve autonomy from all elements, civil society, private sector, everybody. But what we see is this notion that economy means business. That's not what it is. So first, I have a problem with, it tells me that you don't know what they're doing. Two, I have a problem with coherence. I don't know how you're going to bring this large team together. You call it coordinating council. So it presupposes that these guys will sit together and coordinate. This is not a idea session. This is not a workshopping platform where you organize round table, people bring ideas. This is coordination. And so I think this is a misnomer. I think the president probably meant well. And I think it looks like lazy. I mean, the president was attacked by Dangote. They said 30% or 32% interest rate is going to kill the economy. The next day, Dangote, come and tell us how to get this done. It sounds to me as too much of avoidance of executive action. The president should own back the policy-making machine. If your guys are not good enough, and that's the problem with the special advisors you have. Look, the idea of the presidency we took from the American process, the chief of staff, is that the guys who constitute in America the Office of Management and Budget or Domestic Policy Office, if you talk about the UK, these guys, the special advisors, constitute the policy team. They don't need any other so-called coordinating council. This team will now, on need basis, engage with the Dangote, for example. I mean, you can call them to a breakfast, or call a special IT entrepreneurs to a special breakfast to talk about their policy, and then hear them out. This is periodic. This is not about council. This is periodic. You engage them, but the real machinery, cracking out policy, is the Presidential Advisory Council, which is going to be, in the U.S. case, appointed and confirmed by Senate, and two other persons, just three people constitute the economic advisor, the Council of Economic Advisors of the President. So I think that this is basically doesn't suggest confidence in the government. It doesn't suggest that the government knows where it's going. It suggests like casting around for a solution. I mean, okay, let's get everybody into the room. I mean, that's political. That's not economic policy making.
One is tempted to ask, 2 trillion to reflate the economy. In what direction would the money be going to?
Okay, yeah, they didn't give detail, but for example, I can imagine that they have scoped and say, look, maybe transfers. For example, think around the so-called support to SMEs. Yeah. We don't know what the tag each of them is. So the print could think about, okay, we see constraints in terms of financing for some businesses that have spillover, in terms of economic growth. So we want to go there. For example, look at the energy sector, investment in independent power producers. The argument is that with more power, you could actually increase the GDP growth by maybe 2 to 5%, depending on areas. So did this fund, and they would have done the analysis and said, this is a sector we're going to, this is how much we want to put in this sector, and we get to 2 trillion. I don't want to believe this is just draw a name out from the air, say 2 trillion. I want to believe that they have identified drivers of economic recovery. One area everybody would think around would be, for example, think around agro businesses. We need to harness, optimize the value of agro business. Think around small medium enterprises, even the so-called digital economy that the young man, the minister, has been promoting startups. So those could be areas. But the key point here is clarity as to where you're putting the money. But more than that, I think that we should run away from this tendency to think that the change maker is the private sector. The private sector is doing a great job, but that is not their job to make public policy. And when you need somebody from the private sector to do policy, then you co-opt them, you buy them off, and then they work for the public sector. So the economic management structure should be very clear, distinct from the business angle and the civil society angle. So, but each time you can consult with them severally, but you want to be sure that there's coherence, clarity as to how policies are made. So I can't imagine this council, for example, coordinating anything. So it's going to be another bazaar, another big show, and then they inaugurate them, everybody goes back, because they come from different tendencies, they have different issues, different interests, they have different expertise that are not totally aligned. So your job is to own economic policy and put a team that's responsible. Is that team that should hash out policy, think around implementation, monitor and evaluate them, and then reach out to anybody they think that they need to know what they're doing. So I'm not opposed to having periodic touchdown with business communities, but I don't think you need to staff any council coordinating or organizing with varied persons from business, from subnationality, from governors who ought to mind their business and seriously drive development in the states.
Thank you so very much, Associate Professor of Law Sam Amadi, for coming to shed more light on the President Coordinating Council, Presidential Coordinating Council, with a 2 trillion naira to reflate the economy. Thanks, Sam.